right, everybody, welcome on in. I'm going to get us going on Facebook real quick here. Actually, I'm going to pause the recording for just a second for the sake of the replayers so that you don't have to watch all of this stuff. Let me see. Before we get into this, I just want to say very honestly, before ProWritingAid was a sponsor, I was a user. I've been a user of it for, gosh, I don't know, 7, 8 years. Is that possible? It's been a long time since I started using the tool, and I just used it again with my most recent novel. And I think that one of the coolest things, first of all, is with the plugins, you can put it on anything. So writing your blog posts, even though I don't always make the suggestions that I should, but and you know what it needs to do? It needs to fact check you on dates, because that's my biggest problem, is putting the wrong dates and times. I'm just kidding. But one of the things that I love it so much for is helping me see how many times I use the same word over and over and over and over. I had some variation of the word no, knows, knowing, whatever, like 197 times in my novel. And just going through and cleaning up that one word helped me so much with the revisions of my book. And that's just one teeny tiny little tool. So I am such a fan of ProWritingAid. I am so grateful to ProWritingAid to continue to support us year after year in the Women in Publishing Summit. Our sponsors allow us to keep the pricing very, very low. You may notice that we are still one of the least costly virtual conferences that exist, and we do that on purpose to make it as accessible as possible. And of course, our monthly training. So thank you so much for being a part of that. And Hayley is with ProWritingAid. She's done a multitude of things throughout the years. She's moved up. Are you the marketing director now? Is that
Director of Community.
Director of Community? So another newish title. So we're so
Yeah.
glad to have you back, and your webinars are always phenomenal. So we're going to get into it and let's get going. Thank you so much.
Cool. I will share my screen. And first, apologies, everyone, for my hat. It is very cold in my apartment right now. So apologies for my hat and my slightly runny nose. But we are here today to talk about editing. Just a couple quick notes. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as we go. But if you have any questions for me that you want to make sure I answer, I'm going to leave some time at the end. But if you could drop those into the Q&A, which is in the middle button of your screen, that would be great, because the chat tends to move pretty quickly, and I might lose a question. So if you have a question, please drop that into the Q&A, and I will try to get through as many of them as possible towards the end. Then again, just as a quick reminder, I'll mention it again at the end as well. It is the last day of our Black Friday/Cyber Monday sale. It's the best price of the entire year, 50% off yearly or lifetime, both our premium and premium pro plans. So if you're interested, take advantage of that, and just do that. I think Alexa's going to drop the link into the chat, but you can also just find it by going to ProWritingAid.com. The price is everywhere there. Okay, let's dive in. We are talking today about how you can use technology to make your editing process simple and efficient. And my name is Hayley, as Alexa mentioned. I am the Director of Community at ProWritingAid. I've been with ProWritingAid for almost 7 years now. So it's definitely possible that you've been using this for 7 years or beyond, because I've been here for 7 years. And my job is to talk about editing, to talk to writers, to host our plethora of free webinars, classes, etc. So it's really just the best job in the world, because I get to talk to writers all day. And I want to start today with a story that maybe some of you can relate to. So when I was 22, I finished my first novel. I had been working on it for years. It was the first project I had really kind of dreamed of. I'd written a bunch of fan fiction before then, but my first original fiction, I finished when I was 22. And I was really excited throughout the entirety of that process, and I maintained a lot of momentum. It was a project that I had been working on for years and years and years. I had a really good idea of where I wanted to go, and by the time I actually sat down to draft it, I was so excited, and I maintained so much momentum through the drafting process. And then when I got to the end of that, I didn't quite know what to do. I went through and I did an edit, and I did a pass for kind of commas and grammar and spelling errors. And I did another one where I looked at sentences. But then after that, that novel just languished in editing for years. It's actually still languishing in editing over a decade later, because I just didn't know what to do with the editing process. I really understood what to do to get to the end when I was drafting, but I didn't understand what to do with editing. And so I just kind of kept editing it over and over and over again without a real plan and without a real understanding of where I was going or what I was even looking for to know that it was done. And this has been the case for many of my projects, particularly the ones earlier in my writing career. And I'm just curious if anyone else has had that experience. Feel free to tell me in the chat. Have you had a project that's been languishing in edits for a really long time that you're just not quite sure what to do with, or something that you've just, had where you're kind of thinking about it for a really long time and not quite sure what to do every time you go through? Yes, lots of yeses in the chat. Great. Yeah. I think this is a really common issue. And that's kind of what's at the heart of this presentation today. Because I feel like, yes, as Alexa says, 60,000 plus words into a book that I've sat on for 7 years. It's really easy to understand where to start and stop when you're writing, because you start with a blank page and you end when you hit the end. But when you're editing, it's really, really difficult to understand where you're going and what you're doing and when you're done. So today I'm going to talk about what happens during the editing process first and foremost. So what does editing even mean? What should you be doing at a bare minimum? What should you be doing if you want to go a little bit more in depth? How can you make sure that you have done the kind of key pieces in order to pass your manuscript on to the next part of the process? Then I'm going to talk about why technology is specifically helpful for self-editing, and why I believe that technology can really support your editing process and help you get to a point where you feel satisfied with what you've done and ready, again, to take that next step with your manuscript. Then I'm going to talk about how to use technology to support story or developmental editing. And then I'm going to talk about how to use technology specifically to support line editing. After that, we'll go into questions. We'll just dive in. All right, so again, let's talk about what happens during the editing process. So the first thing I want to get across is that editing is where your story, your manuscript comes alive. This is where you are going to examine every single aspect of your story, from your plot, your characters, your settings, your word choice, your sentence structure, your pacing, etc. A lot of us as authors dread the editing process because we're writers, we're not editors, except for those of us who are both. But for a lot of us, it's really difficult to understand what happens in the editing process because we don't know what to expect. As I mentioned, writing it's not easy, but you start with the blank page, you end at the end, and it's kind of clear that you reached a stopping point. Editing can last forever, and it can be incredibly difficult to understand what should you do at different phases and keep yourself on a regimented schedule that's actually moving you towards a real goal at the end of that process. Now, let's look at what a linear editing process would look like. So if you were to go through editing in a specific set of stages where you did discrete tasks at each and every single stage, this is what that process might look like. You would start with something like your first draft. You would then go into a story or developmental edit where you look at bigger picture pieces of your manuscript. You then might decide to bring in beta readers or critique partners to look at your manuscript as a whole. You might then do a round of line editing. You might then send your whole manuscript to a professional editor for a final polish and a look at those kind of pieces that had not been addressed before. And then you would have a final draft. Now, that is an incredibly linear editing process that checks off all of the kind of needed pieces that you have. But for most people, an editing process looks a lot more like this with about 100 more squigglies on it. For many of us, we'll go through several different rounds of drafting before we even start to go into story editing. Some of us might go from a first draft down to right away into bringing in beta readers or critique partners before we even start to edit ourselves. Some people might go from a first draft into line editing because that's what they're comfortable with before going back to a story edit. Some might skip right from first draft to professional editor because they don't want to do any of the editing by themselves. Some might go back and forth between several of these stages over and over and over and over again. That is all okay, because what makes a good editing process is up to you and up to the specific manuscript that you're working on. Every single book that you write will have a different process and will have different needs depending on how it's conceptualized, what you're struggling with, and what you need help with. Again, what makes a good process is up to you and the specific project. So there is no right or wrong in editing. The only thing that I will suggest is that you should have a specific goal in mind for when you need to get to the end of editing, so that way you're not sitting on a manuscript for years and years and years without moving towards an ultimate goal. But other than that, what makes a good editing process is completely up to you. Many writers will prefer to work by themselves the entire time they're going through their editing process. Some people like to work with others the entire time because they have a really hard time evaluating their own work. Some people really like to use technology. Some people really do not. Some people will just go through one round of revisions. Some will go through dozens and dozens and dozens. Again, that is all okay. What I am suggesting today is that you do at least 2 rounds of edits before you get to your final draft. Those 2 rounds are your story edit and your line edit. Your story edit is a discrete phase where you go into your manuscript and you look at your plot, characters, world, argument, all of those kind of bigger picture questions before moving into line editing. Now, I recommend that you do this as a discrete phase because you can make substantial changes to the structure and substance of your manuscript during the story editing phase. And we'll go in later in this presentation into a bit more depth about what story editing actually looks like. But at a high level, it's important to understand that this story or developmental edit is where you're really looking at the big picture, at almost a 1,000-foot view down into your manuscript to understand if you're setting it up in a way that's getting your point across to readers. Are you telling a good story? Are you making a good argument? If the answer to those questions is no, then during the story editing process, you might change whole swaths of your text. If you're working on fiction, you might decide to completely eliminate a subplot or introduce another character to add more tension or change an entire setting. There's bigger picture edits that are happening at that phase. So we do that as a discrete phase before we then jump into line editing to ensure that when we get to line editing, which is the nitty-gritty work of the story, you're not wasting time editing work that's going to go away. So the first round of editing that I recommend every single person do is that bigger picture edit, where you're looking again at the development of your story or argument at a whole, at a macro level. And then after you are very happy with your story or argument, then I recommend moving into line editing. Line editing is a completely different phase of editing where you're looking at how you use language to tell your story. So if the story edit is at the story level, think about things that's like the chapter level, at the act level, at that kind of macro larger level. Line editing is where you're really zooming in page by page and sentence by sentence to look at how you use language to tell your story. Again, later in this presentation, I'll get into some specific questions that you should be asking yourself at this stage and looking for. But overall, again, there's 2 discrete stages. One big picture where you're looking at plot, story, argument, etc. And then the second phase is where you're zooming in page by page and line by line to see, is your language living up to the story that you're trying to tell? Now, again, at the very baseline level, I recommend that every single author goes through at least 1 round of story edits and at least 1 round of line edits before you consider your draft finalized. But for many of us, that process is going to happen where you're going to go back and forth between the 2 stages many, many times, where you might bring in people in between, or where you might go back and forth yourself. But anyway, regardless of kind of how you end up actually facilitating your editing process, I recommend that people do at least 2 rounds of edits. And again, at least in those 2 different discrete phases, so that you're really focusing on different questions at each time. It can be really, really difficult to turn off the line editor, to turn off the use of language, but focusing on that story and that argument in the developmental edit and the story edit at the beginning can really help to shore up the overall structure of your manuscript, again, before you get into the use of language. So if that's a big picture kind of look at editing and what editing should have, how then can technology help? So technology can help in a number of different ways. Technology, first and foremost, can help save time and money when you're editing. Editing is very, very hard. And again, just because you are a good writer or have been writing for a very long time does not mean that you can edit well, and also does not mean that you can edit your own work pretty well, because it's really difficult to judge our own work effectively. That being said, it's really also very hard and expensive to find resources that you can utilize for editing. Oftentimes, if we're trying to find beta readers or critique partners, we might not find people who understand our genre of writing or the specific topics that we're writing on. So while they're willing to write things or while friends and family might be willing to read things, we have to take their kind of feedback with a grain of salt because we don't understand how to contextualize that, or if the feedback even really matters if it's not something that they're used to reading. Similarly, if you wanted to engage with a professional editor, which is a great thing to do, it can often be incredibly prohibitively cost expensive and time consuming. So while we here at ProWritingAid absolutely recommend that you use a professional editor, we recommend you bring in technology earlier in the process so that you're saving money and using the professional editor for the pieces that really, really matter. So technology can really help you in 3 different ways. The first is that it can provide you instant feedback. So even if you have the ability and resources to work with an editor throughout your entire process, editors are human, they have waiting lists, they have calendars, they have time off, etc. So when you are writing might not be the best time for your editor to give you feedback. Technology can help you in those in-between times when your editor is ready, giving you that instant feedback so you can be working and editing and improving your manuscript even if your editor is not available at that time. As I mentioned, technology can also help you polish before you use a human editor. I often talk to editors who recommend using ProWritingAid because they want to make sure the manuscripts they get are in the best possible state, so that they're really focused on the pieces that a human can help with. We strongly believe that human creativity and human genius cannot be replaced by technology. So a human editor can tell you things like, have I resonated with this argument? Has this character touched me? Has this character, is this chemistry believable? Did I want to keep reading? Those are all things that a human can tell you that technology can't. But technology can help you determine things like, the pacing is a bit slow here because of how you've structured your sentences, or, you're missing a lot of commas, or you have a bunch of spelling errors, or like Alexa's example, you've repeated yourself 157 times with this word. So if you utilize technology before you employ the human editor, you're cleaning up all of those errors so that the human editor can focus on the pieces that are really the most important to making sure your manuscript resonates. So polishing before you go to a human editor helps make your time with the human editor as effective as possible so that you end up with the best manuscript in the end. And then there are also some things that technology can share that it's just impossible for a human to share. So one of the things that technology can do is identify all of the repeated words and phrases within your document in 3 seconds. That is really difficult for a human to do. It would almost be impossible for a human to do, or would take a really long amount of time. However, the word, if you're repeating yourself with the same word over and over again, that can really take your reader kind of out of the story. So finding that difficult to find information that, again, can have a really sizable impact on your work can be done instantly with technology, and again, can really get you to a stronger manuscript almost instantaneously without the support of a human. Now, for all of us who are utilizing technology, I want you to think about using it as a spectrum. Now, some of us as writers will never use technology at all as part of our editing process, and that is completely valid. Other people on the other end of the spectrum will use technology throughout editing, and utilizing technology throughout editing, even within that itself, is a spectrum. Some people might use technology for things like spelling and grammar checks, finding places where you've misspelled words. Others might utilize tools like ChatGPT or other generative AI tools to do everything from assess your work to suggest rewrites or ways to redo what you've written. All of that is valid, and all of that is open to you and your decision as the author. Because a lot of people are nervous about what utilizing ChatGPT on your work can mean, I just want to pause for a second and talk about how we think about utilizing generative AI, as well as kind of the features that we built into the program to give you the most control as possible. So first, like I said, we strongly believe at ProWritingAid that technology will never replace human creativity. So all of our features are built to augment human creativity. So we have no features that will generate a document for you in 30,000 words within the touch of a button. That's just not what we do. What we're there to do is support your human creativity and support you in editing your document, not generating large swaths of new text for you. So if you're looking for something to do that, then a different tool is the better option. Now, the features within our product that do have generative AI are all scalable. So every single feature that we have within ProWritingAid is something that you can use without generative AI, or there are a few features that you can add on generative AI to either suggest things that you could do if you like to use generative AI as an inspiration partner, and even replace, again, single sentences or short amounts of text if you are comfortable replacing your text. So all of that is within your control. And for each and every single feature that I'll show you today, there are ways that you can just get the baseline of kind of information from the technology. There's ways that you can scale that up to get information, to get inspiration from AI. And then there's ways that you can scale that up a little bit more to even get suggestions into your text. But all of that is under your control as the writer, and you can decide what makes the most sense for you and what you're doing. The only final note that I'll have about that is that, actually, there's kind of two quick final notes that I'll have about that. One is that if you are concerned about the safety and security of your text, if you are going to use a generative AI tool, I would recommend being very, very careful about the tools that you look for and ensure that they have a strong privacy agreement and do not train their models on your text unless that's something that you're happy for them to do. We automatically do not save, retain any of your text, and it's never used as part of your models. But if you would like to use generative AI as part of your creative process and you're using a different tool, make sure you look into that, into how they're utilizing your text, and you find, again, a company that you're happy with that policy, and then opt out if you're not happy with that policy, or see if you can opt out. And then the final thing that I'll say is that, again, there is no kind of clear answer right now about whether generative AI will flag you for different publishers or put you against, again, different kind of publishing agreements. So within each of the features that I show you today, and within your use of ProWritingAid, there are plenty of ways to utilize technology without running afoul of any publisher requirements around generative AI. So I don't want you to think about technology as something that automatically uses generative AI. Every single thing that we do has plenty of value without that. And then again, if you are happy to use generative AI, if it doesn't run afoul of any of your publishing requirements, then there are ways to scale that up, but you do not have to. So all of that to say, utilization of technology is a spectrum, and wherever you fall along that spectrum is valid. My ask for you is just to be understanding of, who the company that you're working with is, make sure that their privacy policies align with how you want to protect your text, and then understand where you're trying to publish or what you're trying to do with the work to make sure that the way that you're utilizing technology as part of your editing process falls within those guidelines. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions of those as we go through. I know it can be confusing. But before we get into that, let's talk about how you can utilize technology specifically to support story editing. So, as I recommended, every single manuscript should go through at least 2 rounds of edit. The first phase of editing that I recommend is story or developmental editing. This is where you are examining your story at the macro level. Here you are looking at your manuscript and the story or argument you're telling. You're taking a substantive look at the structure and development of your story to make sure it's strong enough. So if you are writing fiction, you might want to look, for instance, at how effective your plot is. The plot is central to the story you're telling, so you'll be asking yourself questions during the story edit like, is my plot well paced? Does it have enough conflict? Are there holes or inconsistencies? Are there places where I could introduce more conflict? Are there places where I could take conflict away? If you're working on a manuscript for something nonfiction where you're developing an argument across the course of your manuscript, have you shored up that argument with enough evidence? Are there places where there are holes in what you're trying to say? Are there inconsistencies in your logic between what you're arguing? This is, again, the first thing that you need to look at that high level. Have I told a good story that has enough conflict that's not boring? And then you're thinking, do I need to add more things into that? You're also looking at things like your setting. So in fiction, your characters are going to grow out of the world you create. So you'll be asking yourself questions like, does your setting not only have an engaging location, but does it have a use of time, date, objects, senses? Is it really immersive to your readers, particularly if you're writing something in like science fiction and fantasy? Have you created something that really feels real to your audience? You'll also be looking at story editing, so thinking about how compelling your characters are. Your characters are who your audience will relate to, so you're going to want to make sure that they have clear goals, recognizable point of views. Again, that kind of big picture look at your characters, not the specific words they're saying, but does this character grow and change across the arc of this story? Is this character compelling? Is this side character distracting me from my main quest, or are they something that's actually adding to what the overall story that I'm trying to tell? So these are the bigger picture questions that you're asking yourself during the story or developmental process. You're really looking at the development of what you're telling across the duration of your manuscript to see is it effective or not. So broadly speaking, you're looking at things like plot, setting, characters, again, to make sure that at that high level, the story you're telling is as effective as possible. You might be removing or reducing or changing entire swaths of your text depending on your answers to these questions. So for instance, if you went to the question, did I have enough conflict? And the answer was no, you might decide to introduce an entirely new plot line, which requires substantive rewrites. If you decide, actually, I have too much conflict, you might, on the other hand, cut out an entire side plot. So again, this is why we do this bigger picture editing at the first, because we want to make sure that our text is as whole as possible before we go into the nitty-gritty of line editing. Otherwise, we might end up wasting time on a lot of edits and a lot of sentences that are just going to disappear in subsequent drafts. So story editing is something that technology can really, really help with. There are many different ways that technology can support you with story editing depending on your goals and what you're comfortable with. So it can do everything from give you information on how to improve your setting to tell you whether or not your characters are engaging. And let's take a look at that within ProWritingAid. So for those of you who are familiar with or not familiar with ProWritingAid, I am in the ProWritingAid web editor. So the first thing to know about ProWritingAid is that it has a bunch of just different integrations. So you can use absolutely everything I'm showing you either in the web editor at ProWritingAid.com, or you can also integrate this into Word, Scrivener, Google Docs, Atticus, anywhere that you're writing or drafting. You can get the power of ProWritingAid right in there. So all of these features that I'm showing you, you can get within those tools. So that way, if you're happy to draft in those, you don't have to come over to ProWritingAid to use the editing functions. Now, I am in the web editor, and what you see right now is the real-time report, which gives you grammar, style, and spelling suggestions in real time. For story editing, I'm actually not looking at line edits like that, so I'm just going to turn the real-time off because that's not what I'm concerned about for story editing. Again, real-time is a bit more on the line editing, which we'll go to in a second. So for story editing, I'm going to turn it off because I don't want to distract myself. Now, I'll tell you about a very cool feature we have for story editing in just a second, but there's two features I want to focus on that can help you with the elements of story that I just talked about. The first is the sensory check. So the sensory check really helps with the kind of bigger picture questions about setting. So as I mentioned, during the developmental edit stage of your writing process, you're going to want to ask yourself questions like, have I created an immersive setting? One of the ways that you can do that is by adding as many descriptive words as you can to really make your setting come alive for your readers. Now, when you're doing that, many writers default into utilizing sight sense words rather than sense words for touch, taste, sound, smell, etc. I've just run this report on this sample document here, and you can see that we are heavily, heavily leaning into sight as a sense. We have some touch, we have a little bit of taste, even less sound, and we don't have any smell at all. So again, if we're thinking about the scalability of this technology and how we want to use it, at a very baseline level, this report gives you an instant analysis of the effectiveness of your setting and can tell you right now, we're completely missing any smell words for our setting. We're really heavily related on site. So it's a good indication that we probably have not built an immersive setting, which is one of the things that we want to think about doing during the developmental editing process. So baseline level, we have this information. We can go back and we can start to look at places to add it in yourself. Now, scaling up technology from there, the report also allows you to rephrase individual sentences to add sensory language into them. Sorry, my computer's a bit slow because I'm screen sharing. But basically, you can highlight a sentence, click Suggest Rephrases, and then from there, using generative AI, the tool will suggest different ways that you can add sensory language into it. Now, again, you can scale this up depending on what you're comfortable with. So one thing to do, the report gives, or the rephrases give you one sensory rephrase for the sentence with sight, one for touch, one for taste, one for sound, one for smell. So you can highlight and get some inspiration of what you want to do. So maybe you want to add in more smell and you just want to have a look and see, okay, what does it tell me that I can do for smell? Or what does it tell me that I want to do for sound? And again, if you do not want to insert any generated text into your document, this could just be the source of inspiration for you. But if you're more confident with it, you can copy the sentence and paste it directly into your text. So again, this is a perfect example of how technology can scale up for you depending on what you need. At the very baseline level, it gives you all of this information instantaneously that would be really difficult for you to understand by yourself. At the next level up, you can utilize the generative AI features to suggest inspiration for ways that you might fix and add sensory language into it. At the most confident level, if you're happy to, you can take a selection and insert it into your text. But all of that is under your control as a writer, and it completely depends on what you're looking for and what you're trying to do. So that is one way you can get developmental feedback and story editing. You can do story editing within your document. Another way you can do story editing is within the critique report. So the critique report takes a slight longer time to do. But this critique report basically gives you a high-level look at the key questions that we were just talking about for developmental editing. So it will tell you things like your plot and your story. For instance, this story starts with a strong hook, which is great. However, it moves at a leisurely pace. It focuses more on the internal monologue than driving towards a specific goal. So that might be something that I want to look at. It gives you an analysis of the characters, if they're easy to sympathize with, if they are creating a connection with the readers, who they are, what they're getting across, so that you can do that spot check to understand, have my characters gone across a transformation? It also does a thing like, it also looks at setting. It also looks at tone of voice, writing style, pacing, potential improvements, etc. So at a single chapter level, something like the critique report comes in and it gives you an analysis of your story across those big picture questions, so you can understand, where am I falling short? Where might I need to make some changes? And where am I happy? Now, this report is generated by an AI model, but it doesn't touch your text at all. So you can utilize it, again, to help you find that instantaneous feedback and instantaneous support on your document, and then you'll have to make the changes yourself. Right now, critique works on up to 4,000 words at a time, but we have our 2 new reports that are going to work on full text, manuscript analysis and reader impression, that are coming out within the next month or so, which is very exciting. So stay tuned for longer document. Until then, you can run the critique report at an individual chapter level. So that's a good look at kind of how we can utilize technology to support the story editing side. Now let's flip over to line editing. So line editing, again, is the second major phase of editing. During the line editing, you've solidified your story, you've solidified your argument. Now you're going to zoom into each individual page and even each individual sentence to judge how effectively you've told your story. Your overall goal here is clarity. So your goal is to make sure that the story that you are trying to tell is as effective as possible, and is as effective as possible in the utilization of your language. So are you using language in a way that makes your story easy and clear to understand? So this is where you're going to be looking at the use of language to tell a clear and engaging story. You'll be assessing things like your word choice, your readability of individual sentences and passages, the style that you're using for your sentences. First, you're going to be looking at clarity. So you'll want to make sure that the language you're using is simple and effective. You'll be wanting to look at subjects and verbs. Are they the stars of your sentences? Are you overly reliant on something like passive voice, which can take the power away from your sentences? Or have you utilized active voice wherever possible to make your sentences as strong as possible? Are you choosing specific words that explain exactly what you're trying to say? So instead of saying something like ran quickly, you say dashed, or instead of saying something like it was very cold, use a stronger adjective like freezing. Instead of describing someone as beautiful, which can mean anything to anyone, are you describing their sparkling blue eyes and their chiseled bone structure? So again, you're looking at the clear use of language to make sure your story or argument is as accurate as possible. I really want you to think of clarity as making sure the picture that somebody has in their mind is as close to the picture that you are trying to describe as possible. So if the sentence is overly complicated, if it's overly vague, then that picture, that movie that they're playing in their mind is not going to be accurate to what you're trying to show. So you're really making sure the use of language is as simple and clear and as close to what you really mean as possible. So again, looking at passive versus active voice, specific word choice, and then also readability. Oftentimes during the drafting process, our work is more difficult than it needs to be for our audience. So one of the things you'll do during line editing is assess your readability grade and see if it makes sense for the genre of writing that you're doing. You might then have to pare back your language, again, to make it more simple and clear and palatable for your audience. Just to give you an idea, a lot of mass market fiction is published at the 7th grade US reading level, which means that a 12-year-old could read and understand it. It has nothing to do with whether the content is appropriate for a 12-year-old. So it could be very adult content, but the language used in mass market fiction could be understood by a 12-year-old, even in very adult genres like romance, erotica, etc. The language should still be very simple so that a 12-year-old could understand it, even if the themes are not appropriate for them. So during the line editing process, you'll want to go and make sure that your readability level matches the type of story that you're trying to tell, so that you're not wildly outside of the norms for your specific genre when you're trying to publish. You'll also be looking at engagement and your use of language to propel your readers forward at this time. So this will be where you look at things like pacing from a sentence, a micro level. So you might be looking, if at the macro story editing phase, you're looking at, have I spent too long on this scene or too, short at this scene? During the line editing phase, you're looking at your sentences. Do you have too many long sentences back to back to back? Or do you have too many short sentences back to back to back? Or are you going flip-flopping back and forth in a way that creates exhaustion for your reader? So you're looking at pacing at the micro level. You'll also be looking at things like echoes and repeats. Have you repeated yourself in a way that's going to take the reader outside of your text? Because all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, they've just used the word turquoise 100 times within this document. Or they've said this phrase five different times in the entire story. It's really kind of taking me out of it because I just keep hearing the phrase, she didn't know what she got herself into, right? So are there places where you have echoed yourself, repeated yourself, that again are just going to take the reader out of the story? You'll also want to look at things like, have you changed up your sentence starts to avoid a feeling of repetition? So you don't have 10 sentences in a row that started with she thought, or I decided, or I went, or I, she, etc. The. Again, all the ways that you can be as clear as possible and propel your audience forward and not have them get caught up in the use of language and whether or not that's kind of creating this sense where they're distracted by the language and taken out of that story that you're trying to tell. Now, just like technology can support with story editing, technology can support with line editing. Again, you can scale the use of that up depending on your goals and what you're comfortable with. So it can help you do everything from simplify your sentences to identifying places where you've repeated yourself, and it can do that instantaneously and again, scalably so that you can edit your work as quickly as possible. Now, if we come back here into ProWritingAid, again, I am turning real time back on because now we're at a point where I actually am doing line editing. So to highlight a couple of different features for you, the real-time report underlines grammar, style, spelling, passive voice within your document. So these are kind of the basic line editing checks. So you can come in here, and the way that I typically work is I come in here and I find places where there are redundancies, or where I've used passive voice, or I have a word that I can choose a stronger word to replace that. So that is all used within the real-time checker. The second thing the real-time checker has over here on the right-hand side is a goals sidebar with all of the kind of key line editing goals that we just talked about. So the way that this works is it shows you the typical range for your genre. You can select from a number of different genres across creative and non-creative fiction. This is general fiction, so I'll switch to that. It'll give you the range for your particular genre and then tell you whether you are inside or outside of that range. So for grammar and spelling, you'll notice the range is 80% or higher. We don't specifically look for 100%, but you can see that there's a ton of grammar and spelling errors in there. So that's an area that I really need to look at. Readability, on the other hand, I am within at the far end, but I'm within that range. So maybe readability is not something that I need to pay attention to. So again, this sidebar gives you a really good look at where you can focus and what you might need to do to change your work. So if we come into slower pacing, we can see here that we have a high level of slower pacing paragraphs. This might suggest that I would like to change those and to, again, look at how I can utilize sentence lengths to change that more effectively. Now, another report that can support you with that pacing is the sentence length report, which I found by up here. This gives me a visual representation of each of my sentences, so I can see clusters of places where I have very, very long sentences and clusters of places where I have short sentences, and decide, maybe it's a descriptive passage and the long sentences are okay, or maybe actually this is an action sequence and I need it to be much, much faster. So I need to take a look at my pacing there. So it gives you a really visual look at how things are grouped. Again, depending on your comfort with technology, this at the baseline level just gives you that information. As you see, you can also come in here and suggest rephrases. And the rephrases then break the sentences into two. They make them easier to read. So it's not like a 48-word sentence. It's a much shorter sentence at that time. And you can utilize that either for inspiration, or if you're comfortable, put that directly into your text. Another great example of this is, again, the repeats report. So repeats with a touch of a button gives you all of your repeated words and phrases within the document. Even if you had 17-word phrases, it would go up to 17 words. So just as many repeated phrases as you go, it highlights them in the text. And then again, depending on your comfort level, it can change that for you, or you can just identify those and then find that information. So again, all of these reports are things that you can scale up or down depending on your comfort level. You can also, within our report, look at your sticky sentences, so sentences that are grammatically correct but overly wordy. These often are places where you might have a higher readability, or where you've just not used the most effective, simple, clear words possible. So again, you can highlight a sentence, see the kind of filler words that you have in that. If you would like to, you can suggest rephrases for the sentence, or if you would not like to, you can just use that as inspiration and then change the sentences yourself. So overall, again, line editing and story editing have many different ways that you can edit and change and improve your text with the support of technology. Now, what I want you to take away before we get into questions is that editing is where your book comes alive. While editing is very scary for many of us as writers, it's actually a really phenomenal opportunity, because it's where you can make sure that that kind of mini movie, that argument that you're trying to get across, is as strong as it possibly can be. So while it's fun to draft and it's exciting to draft, editing is such an amazing opportunity to really make your book what you want it to be. If you think about editing as in those discrete phases of the story, the kind of bigger picture, and then the line, then the micro, the individual page and sentence level, that gives you a really nice breakdown of the two things that you at least need to do before you can consider your manuscript finished. Now, as a quick recap before we get into questions, what we covered today: what happens during the editing process. Again, I recommend you go through at least one phase of both a discrete developmental or story edit at the big picture, and then at least one phase of at least a discrete page or individual line edit before you consider your manuscript done. And again, I also recommend that you think about it in those two different phases, so that you're constantly having a direction for where you're going, and as well as having a kind of an understanding of when I'm done, right? So when you're done with each of those different phases. We also talked about why technology is super helpful for self-editing. Again, I really want to stress that technology is scalable. It does not just mean using ChatGPT. It does not just mean using generative AI. There's so much information that you can get with technology that can really support your editing process regardless of what you need. Again, technology can support story or developmental editing. At a high level, it can also support line editing and the kind of individual sentences that you're working on. So with all that being said, let's get into questions. There's a couple questions that people have popped in the chat. If you don't mind just putting those into the Q&A so that I don't lose them, that would be great. And then I'll just drop again Alexa's 50% off link with her code there. This is our Black Friday sale ends tonight. So if you're interested in getting 50% off, definitely do it today. It is the best deal that you possibly can get.
Oh my God.
Okay.
It's such a good deal. I just have to say again, like, especially the lifetime deal. I mean, I've used this on at least 10 books already, and the amount of time it saved me in my overall editing process. Plus, it just helps me become a better writer when you have some, I mean, that to me is the greatest part, is that it helps me become a better writer. So This was phenomenal. You talked about some things I didn't even realize. That's why I love doing this every year, because it's like each time I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that part. I didn't know
Yeah.
about there's so much to this tool. It's wild.
Yep.
Okay, would you like me to read the questions to you?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so first question is for the rephrase feature. What model of AI is used? Will it be upgraded? I often find myself going to Chat GPT because it offers a better edit suggestion, but it would be great to be able to use it in the same window.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. If you send an email to hello@prowritingaid.com, I can give you some more information. I am not quite sure what it is though. But if there are places where you find the suggestions are better in one model or another, just I'd also just love to have that feedback because it'll help us just improve what they are. But I will also say, I think one of the reasons I'm a big advocate for using technology throughout your entire editing process. I think one of the reasons why you might utilize a tool like ChatGPT or something else is because you can kind of customize what you want it to be. So the way that we've programmed things like rephrase is that there are specific, and again, I'm not sure exactly which model it's used, but there are like specific prompts we give it. So for instance, for those sensory language, as I mentioned, it pulls up one of each of the 5 senses. So it won't give you like 10 visual prompts unless you run it a bunch of times, but it will give you one, sight, one smell, one taste, one, etc. For things like sticky sentences, it'll give you it's like prompted to shorten the sentence, etc. So again, if you're looking for like more flexibility to tell the tool, like this is how I want to edit it, ProWritingAid can't do that right now. But again, so that just might be a use case where you want to work with something that you actually can prompt in that case. But again, I think for me, I would say that the level of information that you get in something like ProWritingAid helps you again decide if you're going to make those changes, and then if you need to rephrase somewhere else, that can be useful at that point.
Absolutely. Sherry has a question. Sherry, do you mean if you're using the Word version, if you add it onto Word, she says, if I'm not using the PWA website, where can I find that taskbar, whatever it's called at the top?
Yes, I think so. I'm going to show you Sherry really quickly. So I don't have Word on this computer, but I'll show you in Google Docs. It's the same in Google Docs. It's the same in Scrivener. It's the same in any website. So once you've installed, so I'm on Chrome, so this is the Chrome extension. Once you've installed the Chrome extension, it'll pop up here on the right. It's the same exact thing on Word. It's going to be just this little icon. The underlines will appear in the text. Again, mine is really slow because I'm streaming at the same time. But you can you'll start to see underlines in the text, and then you hit this little report button and it pulls up all of the reports. And the reports are in different drop downs. So like the core reports like grammar, style, spelling are here. The repeats are under repeats. Structure is like structure, sentence length, etc. They're basically in the kind of same categories that they are across the top. So basically you need to install the extension, you can click on it to get the goals sidebar. So just click on the icon to pull up the goals sidebar, and then click on the reports, like hover, click on reports to get each of the individual reports.
That's
And that
great.
works the same in like Scrivener, it works the same in Word, etc.
I actually filmed myself using Word in the last time, but I think it may have been before you guys did your update. But I'll post the recording of what I did in Word so that people can see what it looked like too. Of course, if that's all changed, then maybe it's not. I'll double check in Word and make sure that it looks the same.
Yeah.
Are you willing to share your slides?
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Okay, we'll get those loaded and added up. Is Chicago Menu of Style available in ProWritingAid?
Yeah, good question. It is not available in ProWritingAid, but this actually leads me to another question that somebody had, which was, can you train it to make your specific suggestions? Yes, you can train it. So let me just share my screen briefly. Cool. So there's a couple of different ways that you can customize this. I'm on the ProWritingAid team account, so some of the things are grayed out depending on what I am looking for. But there are, within your settings, there are a number of different things that you can change. So first, you can add your own overused words check. So if there is like a word that you tend to say all the time, you could add that into overused words, so it flags in that report. You can also turn off specific suggestions in dialogue, which fiction writers ask for all the time. Like, I don't want to, my character speaks in cliches, don't flag it as wrong. You can also set like your repeat distance between different word lengths and depend between different phrases. And then you can even customize that a bit more in style guides. Again, because I'm within the ProWritingAid team, some of this is grayed out for me because we have like a set of parameters that we have to have. But all of this is something that you can customize. So you can customize like, I want to avoid sentences of over this long or sentences of this sentences that are this short. You can choose whether you want to avoid passive voice, sticky sentences. You can also change this between like all documents, fiction documents, business documents. You can select your tone of voice. You can add business, like you can, always spell my company name like this, or always avoid business jargon. And then at the very end, you can create advanced style guides. So you can also, we have kind of like the preset menu up there. You can also create advanced style guides. So you could create your own rules to follow Chicago Manual of Style if you would like to. So yes,
Wow.
the answer.
Okay, cool. Nice. All right, you stated that the repeated phrase report gives up to 17 repeated phrases. What about single words? Does it have a minimum it considers a repeat word? Is there a maximum of repeat words it will show in the report?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can also go beyond 17. I was just giving a very high number. I don't know if there's an upper limit for how long it will show. Yes, so it shows frequent one-word phrases here. And then you also in the echoes report so repeats just gives you like all of the repeated words. So like Jane is the character in here. Jane is one of the repeated words because she's within it a lot. Echoes shows you when they're close together. So like in your manuscript, you might have the name Jane 400 times, which is fine, but actually in this one chapter, you have it really close together a bunch of times. So that's where echoes comes in. Echoes tells you how close together they are. And within the settings, you can customize that distance, like if you want it to be shorter or longer. So yes, it'll show all of those.
Okay, awesome. Where do Christian books fall into I guess she's looking at genres, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would actually say that Christian books are I would look at your secondary genre. I kind of actually think about it. Well, fantasy is a poor example because there's a fantasy category in here. But I would say with Christian books, you would like to think about like the secondary stories. So there's like Christian romance, then I would do romance. If it was like Christian historical fiction, I would do historical fiction. If it was, there can be Christian fantasy or fantasy that's written by Christian authors. So I would kind of think about this, the like secondary, like the type of story that you're trying to tell within the Christian, the kind of Christian book umbrella. But there's also a great suggestion for a larger, we don't have any specific like Christian book section right now. So if you wanted to, I would look at the secondary one, but then I'll also take that back to the team for.
Okay. How about academic type books or non-novels?
Yep, it does work for all of those. So you can see a whole range of different features and different things that you can do. So within academic, we have book reviews, critiques, abstracts. Within business, there's business books, business cases. There's technical writing, general technical writing. There are casual, we have dating profile. I think we made that for Valentine's Day at one point. There's a lot of different versions that you can do.
Okay. What does 5 sparks per day mean?
Cool. So there are two generative AI features that work on sentences. Rephrase is a single sentence depending on a couple of different ways. So like sensory adds more sensory detail. You can shorten a sentence, you can expand it. Sparks first can handle a little bit more text. I think it's up to 2,000 characters. But then there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. So Sparks like lets you change the fluency. It lets you summarize something. You can change the tense. You can change the point of view. You can even continue writing. So it's a bit more of an inspiration tool from there. So you can think about, again, it doesn't generate a whole book or anything like that, but it can be like, well, what might happen next? So a lot of people use Sparks to kind of think of the next idea, which is kind of the name Sparks, to spark ideas. So 5 sparks per day means you can run this feature 5 times.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
While we're on this topic, I know we mentioned it earlier and you said something about we were talking about Chat GPT and AI. This does not when people get really nervous about, oh, Amazon's asking me if I used AI to write my book or was AI used, this in my mind does not count. I think they're
Again,
looking for books
yeah.
that are written almost completely by AI, not assisted writing or rephrase, etc.
Yeah, again, like the things I'll say about that is none of the like anything that tells you if it's AI text or not is it's not good at doing that. Like those are all lies and they're all wrong right now. B, if you really want to be incredibly careful, then you can utilize a tool like this for inspiration, but write everything yourself.
Right.
Again, like Alexa's saying, it's like such a small amount of text that the likelihood is not large that it would flag. But if you're really nervous about it, I either would just avoid these features. You can actually turn them off yourself. So you can turn off rephrase and sparks if you don't want to see them at all. Or you can utilize it for inspiration, but it really depends on how careful you are. Again, so many of these places, they're focusing on like bigger picture books, but B, there's just not a good definition of it right now. So if you want to go on this careful side, just use it for inspiration or turn it off. You still get 25 other reports that you can use.
And just remembering the big picture of why they're asking that question. They're not asking that question to find out if you got a little bit of extra help, because technically when you use an editor, you're also getting extra help to improve your writing. They're really wanting to make sure that when they're selling books that are written by AI, that is disclosed to the buyer. So
Yeah.
using tools to help you edit, it does not count in that question. All
Yeah.
right. How, oh my goodness, I just realized, wow, 158. All right, how does it handle non-English words?
Yep, great question. So the tool, the editing only works in English, but we do have a dictionary, so you can add words to your dictionary if you want to add individual words.
Great. What's the difference between Premium and Premium Pro?
The biggest difference is what you get access to. So premium, you get 1 critique per day. Premium Pro, you get 3. Premium, you get 5 of the sparks per day. Premium Pro, you get 50. So it just kind of
Wow.
accelerates the level you want.
Okay. When will the reports feature for the full text be available in Atticus rather than just chapter by chapter?
Good question. Mid-January. I can't give a
Hmm,
specific date,
coming
but it's really
soon.
soon. We
Coming
actually were just
soon.
having a meeting today about it. If full text is something you're really excited about, I know there's been a couple questions. It's coming really soon. I would still buy the lifetime or a yearly today because it's going to you won't get a discount on it in January. So if you're just waiting for that, like I would still buy it today because you'll get the best price today before the full manuscript is coming. And yeah, like literally I had the launch meeting today, so it's coming very soon.
Also, I just love seeing the collaboration between some of my favorite tools. That's so
Yep.
exciting.
Yep.
Okay, so I know in the past you've said email you if people have these types of questions, but if you use the 50, can you use the 50% to extend your subscription, all those types of things?
Ooh, Suzanne, I think so, but I'm not 100% sure. Send an email to hello@ProWritingAid. I have a special code for like if you're past the discount point. So don't worry about the discount. I'll be able to get you the 50%, but I want to make sure I give you the right answer. So just email hello@ProWritingAid and I'll help you with that.
Awesome. Is it available to use with Adobe Acrobat Pro?
It should be. I have not specifically tried it there, but the way that Everywhere and Chrome extension works is it should work anywhere you have large amounts of text. We've tried to have it not be places where you have small amounts of text because people might get annoyed with that, but in Acrobat you probably have larger amounts. So yeah.
Yeah, there's several questions on the sizing, whether you can dump the whole thing in and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So um it slows it way down on the internet. That's why I love the Word plugin so much.
Yeah.
But even so, if you're trying to do a 70,000 word document, you got to be prepared that it's going to take a minute for it
Yeah.
to run that whole thing.
Yeah, that's why I always tell people like like people get like, oh my gosh, it's just been spinning. It's like it actually is working. You just might have to wait on a 70,000 word manuscript, like 5 minutes or something like that.
Okay, if you have any questions at all about the coupon code, about renewing your subscription, about any specific question about the tool, hello@ProWritingAid. Otherwise, hopefully you'll take advantage of it because again, they very, very, very rarely do the 50% off lifetime anymore. So I was very excited when I saw that come back up. Um, how do you make it go away on Facebook if you don't want to
Yes.
use ProWritingAid on
Great
Facebook?
question. Let me just switch my screen share really, really quickly. So this works for any of the websites or any place on your uh, Computer, so first you can turn it on. There's like an eye icon, so you can turn it on and off. So if you're drafting or something, you can turn the suggestions on and off. But if you want to just disable it for a specific site, within Chrome in the toolbar at the top, click on the icon, and you can enable or disable it on a specific website or enable or disable on all websites. So for here, you see it disappears when I am gone.
Uh-huh. Okay, cool. And what training for software use is available?
Yep. So we've got a YouTube channel with a bunch of different like videos on each of the reports. We also have a help desk, and then we do webinars pretty frequently. If you just go to the kind of learn drop down on our website, there's always sessions that we're doing and different ways that you can engage with us there.
Well, thank you. As usual, this has been incredible training. Again, I can't gush enough about, I don't have my hat with me today. Usually I try to wear my ProWritingAid hat, but
Did we get you in a rebranded one?
oh, that's right. That's right. I'll have to get one from, maybe Tom
I'll
will
have to
be
give you
at
one next time we
Automation
see you.
Week next
Yeah.
My son was wearing it the other day. That was hilarious. I walked down, I was like, "You're wearing my hat." And he was like, "I needed a hat." I'm like, "Cool, go market." But this was wonderful. And if you have any questions at all, hello at prowritingaid.com. Get on their newsletter. Go check out, there's tons of what do you call them? Your virtual conferences that you do by
Yes. Yeah.
genre specific are always happening. So check out all of those things. And again, we both would say this does not eliminate the use for using professional editors, but it will sure help you write better and sure help your editor not want to pull all their hair out when they're trying
Yep. Exactly.
to go through that first round of editing. So thank you so much. Tell Tom hello and thank you as well. And we'll see you. They'll be back in the conference in March with a booth to answer questions and chat with everybody. So we will see you all then.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hayley.
Bye.
Bye.